There is a question that no man, however clever or strong, can avoid forever. It is not a question of wealth or learning, nor of youth or age, the poor and the rich, the foolish and the wise, the child and the elder, all must face it. And yet, despite its certainty, it remains the question most ignored, most postponed, and most feared. Are you ready to die? We live in a world of distractions, a world that whispers to us that the present moment is all that matters. There is always one more task to complete, one more journey to take, one more dream to chase. But when the final hour comes, and it will come, what then? What will all your striving have meant? If the whole of your life has been spent avoiding this question, will you find an answer when you need it most? Death is the one certainty that every person on earth must face. No amount of wealth, intelligence, strength, or status can shield anyone from it. It does not ask permission, nor does it wait until we are ready. It comes for kings and beggars alike, for the scholar and the simpleton, the child and the elder. And yet, for all its inevitability, it is the one reality that most people spend their lives trying to ignore. We build walls of distraction around ourselves, filling our days with urgent but often meaningless pursuits, convincing ourselves that death is a distant concern, something that belongs to an uncertain future. But this is an illusion. Most people live as if they will never die, though they know in some quiet corner of their mind that they will. We see death around us, we attend funerals, we hear of tragic accidents, we watch the slow decline of the elderly, yet we rarely let it touch us in a way that alters how we live. When death is spoken of, it is often in hushed tones, as though mentioning it too loudly might invite its presence. And so we put it off, assuming there will always be more time. We tell ourselves that we will think about it later, when we are older, when we have accomplished what we want to accomplish. But there is a deep foolishness in this. Time is not ours to command. Many have planned long years ahead only to find that their days were much shorter than they had supposed. There is a strange contradiction in human nature when it comes to death. On one hand, we recognize that it is unavoidable. On the other, we behave as though it can be indefinitely postponed. We speak of death as something that happens to other people, something that is, for now at least, at a safe distance from ourselves. But death is not a possibility, it is a certainty. The only uncertainty is when it will come. And if that is the case, is it not strange that we spend so little time preparing for it? No man would set out on a journey without first making ready for the road ahead. No builder would begin construction without laying a foundation. And yet, when it comes to the one journey every person must take, many choose to give it no thought at all. What does it mean to be prepared for death? That is a question few ask until they are forced to. The problem is that when the moment arrives, it is often too late to find an answer. The man who has spent his whole life avoiding the thought of death will not suddenly be at peace when it comes for him. The one who has never considered what lies beyond will not be able to find confidence in the final hour. Death is a test for which we cannot cram at the last minute. We must either live in such a way that we are always prepared, or we must face the reality that we are unprepared entirely. Some might say that to think too much of death is to rob life of its joy. They argue that it is morbid to dwell on such things, that one should focus on living rather than dying. But this is a mistake. The truth is that the person who is most prepared to die is the one who knows how to truly live. When a man acknowledges his mortality, he begins to see his days differently. He does not waste time on trivialities, nor does he assume that he has an unlimited supply of time to make things right. He loves more deeply, forgives more quickly, and seeks what is truly meaningful rather than chasing after things that will not last. He does not fear death because he has made peace with it. He knows that it will come, and he has decided to be ready when it does. There is an old saying that no man is truly ready to live until he is ready to die. There is wisdom in that. The person who lives in denial of death is like a man running from his own shadow. He may distract himself for a while, but the reality remains, and when it catches up to him, as it always does, he is left unprepared and afraid. But the one who faces death honestly, who considers its implications, who seeks to live in a way that is worthy of the short time given to him, that person does not run. He does not waste his days in shallow pursuits, nor does he grasp desperately at the things of this world. Instead, he lives with purpose, knowing that his time is limited and that how he spends it matters. Ignoring death does not make it disappear. Pretending it is far away does not delay its approach. The only sensible thing, then, is to prepare for it, to think on what it means, and to live in such a way that when it comes, it is not a terror, but a door to something greater. The wise man does not push this question aside. He faces it, considers it, and chooses to live accordingly. And in doing so, he is not robbed of joy, he finds it. For when one ceases to fear death, he is finally free to live. People often live as if they have an endless supply of time. We make plans for the future, assuming that tomorrow will come just as surely as today. We fill our days with tasks, ambitions, and distractions, always moving forward, always reaching for something just beyond our grasp. Yet, for all our movement, we rarely pause to consider the one reality that no man can escape. Time is not ours to command. We cannot add a single hour to our lives by worrying, nor can we guarantee that the plans we make today will ever come to pass. And still, we live under the illusion that there will always be more time to make things right, more time to accomplish our dreams, more time to prepare for the inevitable. This illusion is a dangerous one because it lulls us into complacency. If we believe that death is far away, we do not feel the urgency to ask the deeper questions of life. We convince ourselves that serious matters, questions of purpose, of morality, of eternity, can wait. After all, there is work to be done, money to be made, relationships to build, experiences to be had. Life is full, and the thought of death is an unwelcome intruder in the middle of it all, and so we push it aside, assuming that we will have time to deal with it later. But this assumption is built on nothing more than wishful thinking. How many have planned for long years ahead, only to find their time cut short without warning? How many have postponed the most important questions of existence, only to meet death without an answer? There is something in human nature that resists thinking about death. Perhaps it is because death reminds us that we are not in control. We can build great cities, cure diseases, and send machines beyond the stars, but we cannot stop the steady march of time. The strongest man will one day grow weak, the wisest will face the unknown, the wealthiest will leave all his riches behind. Death is the great equalizer, the one reality that levels every difference between us, and for many, this is an uncomfortable truth. It is far easier to focus on the immediate, on the tasks and pleasures of today, than to dwell on something that feels distant and uncertain. Yet, the refusal to think about death does not change its certainty. Ignoring a thing does not make it disappear. If anything, it only makes us less prepared for when it finally arrives. A man who never considers the end of his journey is unlikely to walk the road wisely. He may spend his days chasing after things that will not last, devoting himself to pursuits that hold no real value. He may live for comfort, for power, for applause, never stopping to ask whether any of these things will matter when all is said and done. And then when the final hour comes, he will be like a man waking from a dream, realizing too late that he has spent his life grasping at shadows. But there is another way to live. A person who understands that time is not guaranteed will see life differently. He will not take his days for granted, nor will he waste them on things that do not endure. He will measure his actions carefully, knowing that each choice he makes carries weight. He will love more deeply, speak more honestly, and seek what is truly good rather than what is merely convenient. He will not be so easily distracted by the fleeting pleasures of the world, for he knows that they are temporary and that one day he will leave them behind. Instead, he will invest in things that outlast him. Acts of kindness, words of truth, a life lived with integrity. This is not to say that he will live in fear, constantly anxious about the passing of time. On the contrary, he will be freer than most. For when a man ceases to assume that tomorrow is guaranteed, he begins to appreciate today for what it is, a gift, an opportunity, a moment in which he can choose to live well. He will no longer be consumed with trivialities, nor will he waste his time on grudges, pride, or selfish ambition. He will forgive quickly, love fully, and seek wisdom rather than foolishness, for he knows that life is too short to be spent on anything less. The tragedy of assuming that we have unlimited time is not only that we may be caught unprepared, but that we may never truly live at all. A man who believes he has all the time in the world will often waste it, while the one who knows his days are numbered will cherish them. He will seek to use them wisely, not out of fear, but out of gratitude. And in doing so, he will find that he is not only prepared for death, he is prepared for life itself. There are only two ways to meet death: as one caught unprepared in a storm, or as a traveler who has made ready for the journey. The difference between these two is not found in strength, wealth, or intelligence, but in whether a person has taken the time to consider what death means and how they will face it when it comes. Most people prefer not to think about it, as though ignoring the inevitable might somehow delay it. But death is not like an unwelcome guest that can be turned away at the door. It is more like a train that has already left the station, steadily moving closer, whether we acknowledge it or not. And when it arrives, those who have prepared for the journey will step aboard with steady hearts, while those who have spent their lives avoiding the thought of it will be left scrambling in fear and confusion. To be caught in a storm unprepared is a terrible thing. Imagine a man walking through a valley on a bright, clear day. The sun is warm on his back and the path is smooth beneath his feet. He enjoys the journey, not thinking much about what lies ahead. But suddenly, without warning, the sky darkens, the winds rise, and the rain begins to fall in torrents. He is caught in the open with no shelter, no coat, no direction. Panic grips him as he stumbles forward, trying in vain to shield himself from the storm he never expected. This is what death is like for the unprepared. It comes upon them suddenly, exposing their lack of readiness. They have spent their lives focusing on the immediate, on their work, their ambitions, their pleasures. But when the moment arrives to leave it all behind, they find themselves lost. They do not know where they are going, nor do they know how to face what comes next. On the other hand, imagine a traveler who has long known that his journey will take him through dangerous country. He has studied the road, learned the signs of coming storms, and packed accordingly. When the clouds gather and the winds howl, he is not afraid. He wraps himself in his cloak, sets his feet firmly on the path, and presses forward with confidence. The storm does not shake him, for he has made ready. This is the man who has prepared for death. He has considered its reality, searched for its meaning, and found peace in the answers he has discovered. When his final hour comes, he does not resist it in terror, nor does he cling desperately to the things of this world. He has already set his heart on something greater, and he walks forward with steady steps. The difference between these two men is not in their circumstances, but in their preparation. Both will face the storm, both will meet death, but one does so with panic and dread, while the other does so with calm assurance. What makes the difference? It is not luck, nor is it mere philosophy. It is the result of a life lived with awareness, with purpose, with the understanding that the road does not go on forever and that one must be ready when it ends. Many people believe that they will have time to prepare when the moment comes. They assume that even if they have not given much thought to death, they will be able to gather their thoughts and find peace when the time arrives. But this is not how it works. A man who has never learned to swim cannot expect to survive if he is suddenly thrown into deep water. A soldier who has never trained cannot hope to stand firm when the battle begins. Readiness is not something that appears in an instant. It is something cultivated over time. It is the result of a life lived with the awareness that the journey has an end and that one must be prepared for what comes after. If a man knew that he was to leave for a long journey tomorrow, he would not wait until the last moment to pack his bags. He would not spend the night before his departure pretending that the journey was not real. No, he would make his preparations carefully, ensuring that when the time came, he was ready. And yet, many people do the exact opposite with death. They pretend it is far off, that it does not concern them, that they will think about it later. But later is never guaranteed, and when the moment comes, it is too late to prepare. The wise man does not wait for the storm to teach him how to stand. He does not wait for death to teach him how to live. He knows that readiness is not found in a single moment of panic, but in a lifetime of thought, of seeking, of choosing to live in such a way that when the final call comes, he is not caught unprepared. And so when he reaches the end of his journey, he does not fear the road ahead. He has packed well, he has walked wisely, and when the moment comes, he steps forward with steady feet, knowing that he is not walking into darkness, but into the next great adventure. If death is the end, then everything we build, everything we love, and everything we strive for ultimately crumbles into nothingness. The vast empires of history, the greatest works of art, the most brilliant minds, all would be swallowed by time, leaving behind no lasting significance. If this were true, then all human effort would be in vain, and life itself would be little more than a fleeting moment of awareness before an eternal void. Love, kindness, sacrifice, none of it would have any ultimate meaning, for all things would end in the same darkness. Yet something deep within us rebels against this notion. We instinctively resist the idea that life is meaningless. We long for purpose, for significance, for the assurance that what we do matters beyond the short span of years we are given. If death is merely a door, if it is, as some whisper, the threshold of a far country, then the way we live our lives matters infinitely. Every choice, every action, every relationship is part of a larger story, one that does not end at the grave but continues beyond it. This is why the question of what comes after death is not one that can be ignored or put off until later. It is not merely a matter of curiosity, but one of the most pressing and urgent questions a person can ask. For if there is something beyond this life, then to live as though there were not is the greatest mistake one could make. A person who believes that death is the end might live only for the pleasures and ambitions of this world, focusing on wealth, power, or success, thinking that these things are the highest goods available. But what if he is wrong? What if, upon stepping through that door, he discovers that all his striving has been in pursuit of things that do not last? What if he has spent his entire life chasing shadows, only to find at the last moment that he has ignored the one thing that truly matters? We live in a world that encourages us to focus on the present, on immediate gratification, on personal fulfillment, on the pursuit of comfort and success. But if death is not the end, then we must consider whether these things have any true value. Will wealth follow a man beyond the grave? Will his reputation carry any weight in the life to come? Will his pleasures and indulgences hold any meaning when he stands at the threshold of eternity? If death is only the beginning of another existence, then the things we prioritize now may, in the end, prove to be the least important. Some might argue that there is no way to know for certain what lies beyond death, and therefore it is useless to think about it. But certainty is not required for preparation. A wise man does not refuse to pack for a journey simply because he has not seen his destination with his own eyes. He considers the evidence, listens to the accounts of those who claim to have knowledge, and makes his preparations accordingly. In the same way, we cannot afford to ignore the possibility that this life is only a prelude to something greater. If there is even the chance that death is not the end, then the most foolish thing we could do is to live as though it were. The way we approach death shapes the way we approach life, If we believe that death is the final chapter, we may live selfishly, concerned only with our own happiness and success. But if we believe that life continues beyond the grave, then our choices take on a deeper significance. How we treat others, how we use our time, what we value and pursue. These things are no longer just about the present moment, but about preparing for what comes next. The person who believes in an afterlife is not necessarily afraid of death, rather, he is mindful of it. He lives with purpose, knowing that his actions matter beyond the fleeting years he is given. He seeks truth, wisdom, and goodness, understanding that these things have an eternal weight. This is why the question of what comes after death is not one that can be ignored or dismissed. It is the most important question a person can ask because it determines the entire course of one's life. If there is nothing beyond the grave, then all things are ultimately meaningless and we are left with nothing but the present moment. But if there is something beyond, then everything we do has lasting significance. The wise man does not wait until his final moments to consider this question. He asks it now, while he still has time to seek answers. He does not live in fear, but in readiness, knowing that if death is a door, then it is one he must one day walk through. And when that moment comes, he will not step forward in uncertainty, but with the quiet assurance of one who is prepared for the journey beyond. To be ready to die is not a matter of simply acknowledging that death will come. It is not enough to recognize that life is short or that time is fleeting. True readiness for death is not found in resignation or in a vague hope that things will work out in the end. It is found in the way a person chooses to live. A man who is prepared to die is not one who has merely accepted the inevitable, but one who has learned how to live in such a way that he has nothing to fear when the end comes. He is not caught off guard because he has spent his days pursuing that which lasts rather than that which fades. Many believe they are ready to die simply because they have made practical arrangements for it. They have written their wills, set their affairs in order, and ensured that those they leave behind will be taken care of. These are good and necessary things, but they are not the essence of true readiness. One can have every detail of his earthly departure carefully planned and yet still face death with terror. Why? Because readiness is not about legal documents or financial security. It is about the state of the soul. A person who has spent his life avoiding deep questions of meaning and purpose cannot suddenly manufacture peace when the end arrives. A man who has built his life on shallow distractions will not find them to be a firm foundation when faced with eternity. Readiness for death is not something that can be achieved in a single moment. It is something that is cultivated over a lifetime. It is the result of living with an awareness that life is not merely about temporary pleasures or material success, but about something greater. The person who is truly ready to die is the one who has lived in pursuit of what is eternal. He is not concerned with leaving behind a legacy of wealth or status, but with having lived a life of substance, of integrity, of love. He does not spend his days chasing after things that will be forgotten, but instead seeks truth, goodness, and meaning. There is a kind of life that prepares a person for death, and there is a kind of life that leaves a person utterly unready when the time comes. The one who has lived selfishly, always seeking his own pleasure and gain, will find himself empty-handed when he must leave it all behind. He will realize too late that the things he held most dear were never meant to last, and he will see with painful clarity that he has spent his life grasping at shadows. But the one who has lived with purpose, with love, with a heart fixed on what does not fade, he will find that he has nothing to regret when the moment of departure arrives. A person who is ready to die does not live in fear. He is not consumed with anxiety over what will come or when it will come. He does not cling desperately to life as though it were the only thing of value. Instead, he holds life with open hands, grateful for each day, but not terrified of the last. He is able to live fully because he is not weighed down by the fear of losing what cannot be kept. He loves deeply because he knows that love is not wasted, even if time is short. He seeks wisdom because he knows that truth is not bound by the limits of this world. He forgives easily because he understands that bitterness is a burden, not worth carrying. Many live as though the purpose of life is simply to delay death for as long as possible. They chase after youth, health, and security, hoping to push the inevitable further away. But this is a shallow way to live. The goal of life is not to avoid death, but to be ready for it when it comes. And readiness does not come from denying death's approach, but from living in such a way that when it arrives, it is not a terror, but a transition. The person who has made peace with death is the one who has made peace with life. He has chosen to live in a way that matters, so that when the end comes, he can look back with gratitude rather than regret. To be ready to die is to have already begun to live the kind of life that is not wasted. It is to have spent one's days wisely, loving well, seeking truth, and pursuing what lasts beyond the grave. It is not found in fear nor in avoidance, but in a quiet confidence that when the final moment comes, one has already been preparing for it all along. And when that moment does arrive, the person who has lived well will find that he is not stepping into darkness, but into light. There is a great misconception that preparing for death means withdrawing from life, that to think about the end is to turn away from the present, but the opposite is true. The one who is truly ready to die is the one who knows how to truly live. It is not the person who numbs himself with distractions, nor the one who clings desperately to wealth, pleasure, or power. It is the person who has lived with purpose, who has loved deeply, and who has sought after what is good, true, and eternal. For such a person, death is not a tragedy, but a fulfillment, not a terrifying end, but the closing of a chapter in a story that continues beyond the grave. The one who fears death the most is often the one who has spent his life avoiding its reality. He has built his world around things that cannot last, so when the time comes to leave them behind, he is left with nothing. He has poured all his energy into success, into status, into material gain, and now he finds that none of it can follow him. And so he clings, he resists, he is filled with dread, for he does not know who he is without the things he has accumulated. He has spent his years seeking comfort, yet now he faces the greatest discomfort of all, the realization that everything he has built will slip from his grasp. But there is another way to live. There is a way of life that does not end in despair but in peace, that does not lead to regret but to gratitude. It is the life of the person who has made peace with the reality of death long before it arrives. This is not a morbid preoccupation, nor is it a passive resignation. It is a recognition that life is a gift, and because it is a gift, it is meant to be used well. This person does not hoard his days as though he could keep them forever. Instead, he spends them wisely, generously, and with intention. He does not live for himself alone, but seeks to love and serve others. He does not waste time chasing what fades, but invests in what endures. Such a person does not fear the end because he has not wasted his time in meaningless pursuits. He has lived in a way that leaves no room for deep regret. He has spoken the words that needed to be spoken, made right the wrongs that needed to be made right, and sought to leave the world better than he found it. When his time comes, he is not caught scrambling to fix what he neglected. He has already done the work of making peace with others, with himself, and with the reality that his time here is temporary. The tragedy is not that life ends. The tragedy is that so many live as though it never will. They move through their days with no thought of the bigger picture, no awareness of the fleeting nature of time. They assume there will always be more opportunities, another day to mend a broken relationship, another chance to show kindness, another time to pursue what truly matters. And so they delay. They put off reconciliation. They postpone love. They neglect the things of deepest value, all because they assume they have time. But time is never promised. The wise do not live with the illusion that life stretches endlessly before them. They do not wait to do the things that matter. They forgive now. They love now. They seek truth now. They live now. Because they know that the way to be ready for death is to have lived well. When the end comes, they will not be among those who grasp at the past, wishing they had done things differently. Instead, they will meet death with steady hearts, not because they are unafraid, but because they have already lived in a way that makes fear unnecessary. A person who has lived well does not need to be forced into acceptance when the time comes. He has already accepted that life is a journey with an end, and he has walked that journey wisely. He has not wasted his time on bitterness, on selfishness, on chasing after things that do not last. He has built his life on love, on integrity, on the pursuit of what is good, and because of this, he does not meet death with panic, but with peace. In the end, to be ready to die is not about waiting for the moment of death with anxious preparation. It is about living in such a way that when death does come, there is nothing left undone. It is about living so fully, so intentionally, and so wisely that the final breath is not filled with regret, but with the quiet confidence of a life well lived. And when the last moment arrives, such a person does not face it as the end of everything, but as the beginning of something greater.